Bug chasers, HIV transmission, and California's legal change. Hey, it's Prince of Queens, and I saw this story about California changing the penalty for knowingly transmitting HIV to other people from a felony to a misdemeanor charge. And I knew that some people would want to know my opinion on it. A lot of people are more than likely completely mystified about why such a thing would happen, especially considering that the change even applies to people who give blood to blood banks, which does definitely boggle the mind. Why on earth would people not be severely punished for giving HIV blood to a blood bank, you ask? Well, there's a strange truth to this, and this is likely going to shock a lot of people and encourage a bit of homophobia from certain individuals, but my job as a YouTuber is not to protect my gay male community, but rather my job is to tell the truth. And after living in San Francisco for over 7 years, I learned a few things about people living with HIV. While I am HIV negative, I did have some very close friends that were HIV positive that talked to me extensively about having the virus, their treatment, social services related to the virus, and the social scene that develops as a result of all of this working synergistically together. And it's deeper than most people suspect. I think Joe Rogan was recently talking with Jim Norton about the concept of bug chasers, which is slang for gay men that purposefully seek out contracting the HIV virus, and they seemed pretty clueless about why guys do this. They assumed that getting HIV simply took away the pressure off of having to worry about contracting the virus or something, which I know that there is an element of truth to, but it really does go further than that. And by the way, for the record, HIV is not the only STD to worry about, especially once you already have HIV and contracting hepatitis C or something could be a death sentence. Here's the thing. I know this because I have heard it directly from individuals that were living in California numerous times. When you contract HIV, you are green lighted into an entire new world of social benefits, both in terms of systemic services provided to you by the government and charity organizations, but also a new social scene. And this is especially prevalent in California, especially in San Francisco and LA. One friend of mine contracted HIV probably in the late 1990s or early 2000s, and he admitted to me that probably about 10 years later that he was actually glad that he got it. Because with HIV comes disability status, at least in his case, and disability status made it so that he could afford to live in San Francisco without working, at least certainly not full time. Granted, I'm definitely not saying that there shouldn't be any social services for people living with HIV. In my opinion, people should get their medications provided to them, not simply because if they don't, they might die, but also because it makes it incredibly unlikely that they will transmit the virus to other people if they remember to take their meds. Still, it's not just meds that people receive and become dependent upon. There's also basically entire social scenes in cities like San Francisco, LA, and New York that are composed of HIV positive gay men. And seriously, I can tell you, as an HIV negative dude, if you aren't pause, as they call it, you aren't fully accepted in that crowd. These guys tend to have a massive amount of sex and are into dressing up in leather type garb. They have jockstrap competitions and sex parties, and often they have sex in back rooms at certain bars that let them get away with it. Then, add to that the fact that a major portion of these guys double as daytime charity workers for HIV organizations that are funded by the government, as well as a long list of wealthy donors. I'm not saying that every HIV and AIDS charity worker is dressed up in leather 3 nights a week and having unprotected sex, but many are. I hung out a fair amount in this exact scene while I was living in San Francisco due to convenience, as the bars were right by my house, and I knew a lot of the staff, and I had a lot of friends that would go to these nights. The bars weren't entirely composed of guys like this, but the core group very often tended to be. More so, one thing that I noticed was that when a new guy contracted HIV, especially if he was young, good looking, and had recently moved to San Francisco, the community would take him under their wing and almost ritualistically shower him with all sorts of self-esteem boosting kindness, setting him up with everything he needed as a newly found HIV positive young man. They would find him drug and alcohol counseling, healthcare, often jobs at bars and stuff, maybe a job working for a charity, and all sorts of other things. The idea was obviously to show the young man that his life wasn't going to be over now that he has HIV. But honestly, it really did start to look like it could be enticing to guys that didn't have HIV, the way that these guys were treated. In a lot of ways, it seemed like a veritable industry. There was even an organization that I always found rather tasteless called tweaker.org, which was supposed to be a nonprofit charity organization with the purpose of harm reduction, designed to help gay guys use crystal meth more safely or something. They provided free condoms and lubricant to dudes and supposedly education around meth, but they were very clearly glamorizing crystal meth use, which for the record definitely seemed to rise in frequency of usage after I was in town. That all said, not only does contracting HIV make people dependent upon medications, which therefore makes the vast majority of people getting HIV dependent upon the government for healthcare, which could be said to be a big motive for California passing this bill, but this extra element is something that I think few people really have any clue about. People often say that anti-racist educators or feminist educators profit directly from finding racism and misogyny everywhere, and therefore have little to no motivation towards actually ending these problems. Perhaps the same could be said about the HIV-related economy. I won't make this claim because I know that there are plenty of good people working to end HIV, but some might say that that element does exist. That's all I have to say for this video. Stay tuned.